somewhere. We've designed it to like flush into the bay, but when you have more than an inch in an hour or many inches in a day, it pools. It finds its way into the sewage system. If you don't have a tight sewage system, it'll find its way through cracks, through manholes that need to be repaired, lots of ways. And all that stormwater gets into the sewage system and it overwhelms it. And that is the main reason why we have these sewage overflows during significant rain events. So Sarasota County needs to do a lot more to button up their system. And then on the tail end of that, the way that the system is designed in most of Sarasota County is to, and I like the design of it, is to collect your sewage, process it, and then recycle it and use it as reuse or recycled effluent, and then send that out for irrigation. It makes sense, but it's not working here. The end users are golf courses and developments. Typically, the developers don't want to buy it because it's crap. It's really poorly treated. Literally, it's crap. It's very, very high in nitrogen. So these developers, particularly the big developers out east, they don't want it because it's going to cause them a lot of problems in dealing with their stormwater systems. And they're trying to do the right thing, I think. They're creating swales and stormwater retention and coming up with really kind of neat ideas of treating stormwater so that it doesn't pollute our bay. And they don't want to have anything to do with Sarasota County's reuse water because it's extremely high in nitrogen. And the county has known that they've had this problem for many years and they have been dodging it. So I think that that's some easy fruit that the county is going to have to take a hard look at, is upgrading, and the way to fix it is to upgrade their sewage treatment plants. It's expensive. So they have like secondary treatment now, whereas the city of Sarasota and I believe the city of Venice has upgraded their plants to advanced wastewater treatment or tertiary treatment. So what comes out of the city's wastewater treatment plant is it's 3 parts per million, I think, of nitrogen, and it's drinking water quality, they say. And then they actually inject it. They no longer discharge it into open waters. They inject it. The county is still in an older, less, it's a treatment system that does not take out the pollutants that I think that they need to graduate and upgrade to advanced wastewater treatment. So the effluent that they would be treating would then be a higher quality, could then be redistributed throughout the county through their reuse system and be properly applied as irrigation water, which will then, when it does come down into our creeks and rivers and bay, it won't be loaded with as much nitrogen. And my next point, which someone wrote a card, was about septic. So again, we're talking about these structural things that Sarasota County can and really needs to do. So we have septic tanks in my Bayfront neighborhood. Wow, that's odd. Are they safe? So septic tanks are, I guess, safe for you, but they're designed to pollute. And I don't think they're safe for the environment, especially in an urban area where there is sewage infrastructure available. I think there's no place for septic tanks. And Sarasota County, I think, has recognized that over the years, and they've done a lot to take septic tanks offline and to connect them to the central wastewater system, which is flawed. But it's better than septic tanks. And I think that they've done about 2/3 of Philippi Creek, which was recognized as being the highest concentration of septic tanks in Sarasota County. And so they have spent a lot of money over the years in upgrading and getting a lot of these septic tanks. But we still have many, many septic tanks in Sarasota County, particularly in the Philippi Creek watershed, which is impaired for fecal coliform. So Sarasota County needs to step up and provide incentives to mandate, as do the owners of these properties, to connect them. So that's another one of the the major problems. Are Sarasota County's political leaders aware of the problem and discuss? You know, I don't think that they are so much. I think that the staff is aware of a lot of these things, but I think that the county commissioners are going to become aware of it pretty soon. But I don't think that, and I think they're learning, but I think the answer to that is not as much as they need to be. So we need more leadership at that angle. And one of the other things, kind of structurally, we talked about sewage systems, septic systems, fertilizer. I want to talk more about that. Atmospheric deposition. There have been some studies recently that have suggested that much more than anticipated or understood, that regional emissions from vehicles and power plants, we still have coal-fired power plants in our region that create a lot of atmospheric deposition. Nitrogen will basically be deposited on land as well as surface waters in the area, again contributing more to the nitrogen levels. So I think I'm missing one. Well, I guess I want to talk about the structure, you know, with the fertilizer. I was going to talk about that a little later, but the Sarasota County actually has a fertilizer ordinance which is better than many other counties. It was enacted prior to the state legislation, which basically created a baseline for fertilizer ordinances around the state. So that baseline is pretty much where, in order to regulate more than what the state has, counties are unable to because of preemption. I don't know if I've explained that very well, but it was mentioned earlier. That's a serious frustration for plastic bags is an example of it. Fertilizer is a really important example of it. So, and I'd say mangroves as well locally, because the state has legislated already, and they've covered this issue of the limits of local regulation when it comes to regulating and enforcing fertilizer, plastic bags, mangroves. So you can't go above and beyond that. If your local community wants to be more protective, these preemption laws will not allow you to do that. It's very frustrating, and I think, you know, there have been a few instances, or you mentioned one bill that's out there to do away with preemption for plastic bags. Similarly, we need to see more legislation to do away with preemption for fertilizers and other preempted statutes to let local, I'd say progressive or local communities that are gaining a better understanding of the importance of environmental regulation to allow them to break these chains of preemption so that we can properly regulate pollution in our communities. And I'd say fertilizer is the worst example of that I'm aware of. So one other human activity besides, you know, these pollutants that I've talked about that I think, you know, part of these are structural. I guess I'll go a little bit into like our individual activities. Certainly we need to press our local officials and regulators to do more along the lines of some of the things I talked about, but we can certainly, gosh, I'm going to mix these up as to what I've answered and what I haven't. Sorry. No, that's okay. Just everyday activities I think are important. You know, clean up after your dog poo. Have a Florida-friendly landscape. I think we're told these things time and time again, but I think that cumulatively they really add up. I mean, we can all, in our communities as well. I was speaking with the Golden Gate Point Association the other day. I live on Golden Gate Point. And, well, what can we do? Impervious surfaces, even people that live in the city and have balconies, capture your stormwater. Thanks. Don't be careful about how you apply fertilizer and pesticides. Walk to work. The thousands of things that I think we know can be done, and you can look to some of your local environmental organizations. Will have some fact sheets on this, and I know the Sarasota Bay Estuary Program also has educational materials. So one of the other things I want to talk about is our natural communities and the importance of protecting and preserving them. Jack and I were at a meeting last week where we were talking about red tide. And one of the people was like, he just absolutely disregarded the importance of having parks and preserves, and how we need to focus on fixing things like that sewage pipe in Sarasota. And yeah, we need to focus on fixing our infrastructure, but what about our natural infrastructure? I think that's incredibly important and can't be overlooked. So our natural infrastructure is really important. So we need to maintain our seagrass communities that I talked about, our mangrove communities that in Sarasota County have been decimated over the last several decades. We need to maintain and reintroduce natural shorelines in Sarasota County. Jack, what was the figure? It's something like 60 to 80% of our...
I think it's 80%.
80% of our shoreline in Sarasota County, which was at one point natural, has been, is no longer natural. It's now seawalls of one sort or another. There are great efforts afoot, but it's going to take a long time to make these seawalls more Florida friendly, create more opportunities for habitat. Beyond that, just parks. Things like the celery fields that Tom has been fighting to preserve provides like that incredibly important natural infrastructure. The celery fields was, I believe it was really designed as a stormwater project, but it's become this incredible environmental amenity. And think about how this environmental infrastructure serves its purpose, but beyond that, how important it is to us in our souls and in our lives and for our families. But I want to kind of talk more, get back to the prioritization. Because there's going to be a lot of money flowing, I think, from Tallahassee. There's a lot of public anger and interest and voices. And I think it's important to kind of focus a little bit on how we focus our energies on trying to address this problem. And so I see a couple different approaches. I see the approach very much that I favor to focus on, which is the prevention versus the cure or the mitigation. And I think the prevention might be more expensive and harder, but I think that's where we need to focus our energies, because the idea of sprinkling clays and ozonating canals to me is intriguing, not particularly realistic, although I have a lot of faith in human ingenuity. But to grasp a problem like this, where we know of, and we have gaining a much better understanding of the sources of the pollution, and I think we know how to attack these sources and how to ameliorate a lot of these human inputs. I think that's where we should be focusing our energies, not on spending a lot of money on trying to come up with the next cure. So these are expensive fixes: getting people off the septic, replumbing our sewage systems. It's going to cost a lot of money, and it's difficult. And I think that our regulators don't really know where to start. And they need a lot of community support to push them to do it. They need lawsuits, I think. I'll play my role in that. But they also need to hear it from the community, like, hey, we want you to undertake this Herculean task of trying to fix our infrastructure. Because it certainly is a lot easier for them to be like, let's give Moat, I love Moat. Let's give Moat a whole bunch of money and they're going to solve the problem. I don't think Moat is really going to solve the problem. They're not set up to solve this type of problem. They're an incredible amenity to our community, and they solve a lot of problems, but they're not going to take on Red Tide. And I don't know if there's anybody that's going to take on Red Tide, but I think incredibly important that our local governments do. And we're starting to see leadership from Tallahassee. Governor DeSantis has come out with some really impressive policy statements, and he's starting to throw out some numbers of money. And I, as a liberal Democrat, credible critic of the last administration, and optimistic about what I'm seeing come out of Tallahassee. I think that needs to be met locally by everybody, but also our elected officials and thought leaders to really come together and try to fix this. So follow the leadership that we're seeing, and hopefully that'll be sustained. But we need leadership locally at our county commission and our city level as well. So maybe a couple more points, and then I'm going to go to some of the questions. How long do you think I've been talking for? Completely lost track.
Well, as long as you're willing. About an hour.
I have? Wow, feels like it.
Normally we go to about 8:30 and
Okay. So, yeah, I mean, I think there are a lot of questions, but again, with my experience and in my history, I really tend to focus a lot on the regulation and enforcement piece. And I see that has been lacking, particularly over the last 8 years. The enforcement budget for the DEP, the decimation of their staff, Swift Mud's funding disappearing, the growth of power and influence of developers in influencing even local politics has led to an environment where it's hard to even say the word regulation or enforcement. They're like taboo. And I think those are two really important pieces of the puzzle that from my experience really work. I see regulation and enforcement work. And look at like the success of the Clean Water Act. Now we need to take it, ratchet up the next point, the next level to address, like, Clean Water Act was great in dealing with, like, big industries with pipes that went out into local waterways and with toxins and killed fish. And this is so much more complicated, the challenge of dealing with, really, I think that the main challenge is stormwater. But there are in place regulations that are not being enforced that would take us a lot of the way there in addressing some of the things that I've talked about, particularly in the stormwater system. Each county, Sarasota County, has a federal stormwater permit. It's called a MS4 that regulates how they maintain their stormwater system. And there are requirements within these permits that the counties have to take steps to identify sources of pollution, impairments of local waterways, and they have to take concrete steps to manage these polluted waterways. And I think the counties are falling short. I think Sarasota County is falling short in that. And I think, again, when I criticize the county, I think that there are great people that work for the county. A lot of my friends do. But we need more leadership to allow them to do their jobs, because I think they know what they need to do. They don't have the funding and the political will to let them do their jobs. So I'm going to try to answer some of these questions, and then a lot, and then also try to take some hands.
I did get back in 45 minutes, but still.
Okay. Well, I can.
We can stay here easily till longer. If people want to hear the answers to the questions, it's fine with us as long as Justin has the time.
Yeah, and I actually much prefer answering questions than doing prepared remarks. As you can see from my PowerPoint slide, I'm not the most sophisticated speaker, but. Okay. Are you aware that the county appraiser is decreasing the value of homes on the water? Do you know the net effect mangrove communities have on red tide. So no, I wasn't aware that the county appraiser was decreasing the value of homes on the water, but that would make sense. And we have a realtor that's on our advisory board of the estuary program, and he's been doing research in the real estate community about the economic impacts on realtors, and this would certainly feed into that. And I imagine that these decreases might have to do with polluted waterways. I mean, this town is, many of us, I certainly live here so that I can be tied to the water, and that is the foundation, I think, of this community in many ways. So if we don't have a healthy waterway, we're not going to have a healthy community. And part of that is a healthy mangrove community. So the interaction between mangroves and red tide, I'm not sure if I'm really expert at answering that, but I do know that, and that'll feed into just a broader statement, like regardless of red tide, I think we're in water crisis. Red tide is a manifestation of pollution in our waterways. And we know that there's incredible nitrogen pollution, but there's also other pollutants. And so red tide or not, mangroves are incredibly important systems that maintain the health of our waterways. Water quality, they filter, they protect land from storms and erosion, and they provide incredible nursery, a very important nursery for our fisheries. But how much nitrogen, I mean, they take up nitrogen from the water, which will reduce nitrogen in our waterways. But to the extent that they do, I'm really not sure. Again, I decided to go
Justin, CONA is going to have a whole series of programs on this issue, and we will have people that'll be addressing the scientific perspective in more detail.
Great, I want to come because I love listening to smart scientists talk about stuff that I don't know. So regarding dog poop, when we pick it up, it winds up in landfills, is that better? Yeah. Where should we flush it? I would say pick it up, put it in the garbage, put it in the landfill. Modern landfills are lined, and so if they're proper, and Sarasota landfills are generally, I think, they're pretty decent compared to other communities. So they have liners, and they're capped. So it's better than certainly leaving it where it is, better than throwing it in the water or in the bushes. I think better than putting it down the toilet, because as I kind of described, our sewage system here has a lot of failures. So I pick up Mr. Bentley's poop and put it in the trash. Try to get my wife to do it as well. Sometimes she fights me. So how can we develop reliable sources of information regarding health impacts from red tide / environmental destruction? Example, Moat Marine, having accepted fundraising from Mosaic, called into question their credibility and objectivity of reporting. Emergency funding diverted to PR to boost tourism by, yeah, I get the point. So I agree, and that goes back to, our prioritization of, spending money on fixing things that we know need to be fixed versus giving it to Visit Sarasota for PR. I think that we need to prioritize how we spend our money and spend it wisely. And I think, again, Moat is an incredibly important part of our community, and the scientific research that they put out and the researchers that work there, that live in our community, are second to none. But and the Mosaic thing, I think, is kind of they take some money from Mosaic, but I don't think that specifically influences the work that they do. But they rely on funding, and they're very sensitive to political issues. And they, I think, are not well suited to address problems that have really important policy solutions. So they can provide, I think, the information that we need and the scientific support and more. I wish they did more, but I understand that they're not an advocacy organization. And I think that they define their role in that realm. So I'm a fan of moat, but I don't see them being kind of the cure for, or coming up with a
Yeah,
cure
we'll
for.
leave it.
Yeah. How do we get testing for other organisms such as cyanobacteria that are present in the Gulf? What about air quality tests? You know, and I think that's where for testing and analysis, and the Florida Fish and Wildlife Commission, my FWC and MOAT have pretty good resources out there.
They're not testing for any of those things.
So
Could you repeat what's said?
cyanobacteria